Hello, everyone. Welcome back. As I don't do a hello, everyone, welcome back very often, but there it is. We're going to be reviewing games 1, 3, and 5 of the Space Station vs. Vitality series. It's a little bit of a different style video from what I'm used to, but we're going to be kind of breaking down exactly how Space Station was able to pull off really one of their biggest, quality wins as an organization. And to help me with that, I've actually brought along Belleair. Belleair, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Of course, yeah.
I know that you and I talked as soon as the series had kind of wrapped about wanting to replay this one because it was an incredible series. So happy to be here.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know you tend to, on your channel, break down how each of the players go in their play styles, how they connect with teammates, etc., stuff like that. So I'm really interested to get your perspective on how this series went and why, Space Station was able to pull this upset off.
Yeah, and to that point, could you remind me, where are we right now? Is this round 4 of Swiss?
Yeah.
This isn't 5, right? Okay.
This was actually round 3 of Swiss. So both these teams are 1-1. Vitality are coming off of their Game 5 overtime loss against Gentlemates. Space Station are coming up from the lower bracket after beating OG in a sweep. So...
Which was actually a pretty tightly contested season series. I think over the last 3 of them, SSG had kind of pulled ahead, but that's a pretty commanding win for them. As are we timed up? LJ is going to crank that double touch right
Beautiful
there.
double touch by LJ. Yep, that was important equalizer in this game. And I'm sure we'll talk more specifically about what's happening in this game after we break down where we are in the tournament. But yeah, that OG series, a lot of people were kind of discrediting OG based on their LAN performances, and honestly, that was kind of fair. They really disappointed on the LAN stage, but I was really worried about that OG series. Just looking at how the teams matched up since OG was signed, the teams were 3-3 against each other in series, 15-15 against each other in games, and 62-62 against each other in goals. It was about as even as it could have been.
Incredibly lopsided coming into that event. No, yeah. And that's kind of we're gonna, I'm sure we'll bleed into a lot of topics here, but as we go into the off season, OG having, reaching the summit every single time, making all of the majors, and then kind of, dropping a fart in every event is probably not what you would have wanted. But, SSG are one of the few teams alongside of them who could even say that they made majors for this season. So fair play.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of an interesting question to determine who had a more successful season. And this is something that I'm going to do in a video later where I break down the 50 most successful teams of every season. But it's tough to know. Like, Space Station had only 2 LAN appearances, right? With the Major 2 and Worlds, not really counting EWC. But since OG made all 3 LANs, does that make them technically more successful, or does those performances at LAN, kind of diminish that? So
yeah, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts, and interested about another thought. How were you feeling coming into this one? If you wind back the clock, were you feeling confident? Of course, Vitality, former world champions with this exact same roster, kind of didn't deliver as much venom as they probably would have wanted, but I feel like they were probably heavy favorites coming into this against SSG. But did you see it differently?
Yeah, honestly, I was really big on Space Station upsetting Carmine Core before the event. I was kind of running my mouth on Twitter a little bit, confident that, maybe we see the Carmine that we saw in Split 2, and everyone assuming that they were going to bounce back might be wrong. I was wrong in that sense. And so after seeing us get swept by them in a little bit of a shaky series despite the sweep against OG, I was not confident heading into this series at all.
And it looks like so far, I mean, I haven't really locked in on the gameplay just yet. Whose point of view are you on? Are you also on Hoxer?
Yeah, I'm on Hoxer. Or actually, I'm on Chicago. I meant to be on Hoxer, but...
That's okay. Let me come meet you, because I feel like Chicago really it was one of the standout kind of players from this whole event. I really just did not anticipate this level from him. It just seemed like the finishing was something that really stood out. His ability to just, LJ, the consummate creator, getting them into good positions, and then his ability, Chicago that is, to just kind of finish in the box like we're going to see right here. Great timing, the opposite of a caster curse. How did you kind of feel about Chicago's performance throughout?
Yeah, honestly, Chicago was my biggest question mark for the team all season. I am actually very much higher on Hoxer as a player than a lot of people are. I think he did a lot for his name when he came in to replace Daniel and somehow elevated the team from there. But Chicago was really my big question mark for most of the time. I thought he was a solid addition, and it took him and Hawkster a little bit of time to actually figure out how they wanted to play with each other. But no, I thought this World Championship, he was phenomenal.
Here he is here setting up something crazy and then trying to get the dish down for LJ. It's crazy that, I think SSG, at least from the perspective that I've seen them, is they are kind of feast or famine. Like I'm so nervous about them on defense, especially like transition defense is okay, but when they're in their own defensive box, I feel like they kind of can trip over each other sometimes. But then when they're down in the opponent's third, they're just so deadly. And it's surprising to see that they have kind of kept Vitality on that side of the pitch for a lot of this game.
Yeah, I know I was mentioning as we came into this series that I wasn't feeling confident. I think by the end of this game one, I was a lot more hopeful. I thought we were going to get, kind of dashed. But once we were answering each of their goals with a response, I was like, okay, we can actually hang with this team, which, again, was not something I was expecting until we were able to show that we could. All right, so we're going to go back to the beginning of overtime just because there were a little bit of technical issues. But now that I'm actually able to see what's happening in the game, I don't really know where we were talking point. I'm not really sure what we're going to edit together, but yeah.
Well, that's okay. Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely, go for it.
How do you feel about the kind of setup where you have your star player or one of your players in a certain decal, and then you have the other two players in matching decals alongside him?
Oh, well, it definitely threw me off because I thought I was watching Hawkster for the first part of this recording and then figured out that I was watching Chicago. But, I think I will always appreciate LJ for the decal he is wearing. That is a classic homage to Spacestation Gaming's most iconic player. Sorry, LJ, Sipical still holds this title. But I appreciate the fact that he is still rocking that and refuses to let go of it. But
have I got to say, I've been inspired by LJ in this decal, I guess, Sipical specifically. But I feel like Sparkles is actually a pretty speedy boost. Like, I typically just use standard black, but sometimes I'll use the Sparkles. It's actually pretty fast. I like the feel of it.
Interesting. I've never tried that out myself. I might have to get behind it. I've got one of those standard titanium whites myself that I think I roll with. But yeah. It's for the, those of us who weren't around for Alpha Booster. Too poor to get it when trading was a thing.
That's why you got to get on the box mod train, Then you get the Alpha Boost. You don't have to worry about it. And it seemed like, did you see a second ago, Zen almost missed a slot in this overtime to kind of put us away here.
Yeah, I was definitely worried during this overtime. It felt like, despite the fact that we were able to answer all of their goals, we were going to need to actually get a goal first for ourselves. And that's something that Space Station was doing a lot throughout the tournament. One of the main instances of this was the Game 6 against Furia. It felt like we were pretty comfortable on our own goal line being able to get those saves. But it wasn't really comfortable from a viewer's perspective, especially knowing, the tournament's on the line if you concede, at least in that Furia example.
Yeah, it was wild how many games. Oh, that's a great 15 of the box. Nobody trusted it. But it's crazy how many games ended up going so deep. What an unbelievable fake if LJ would have put that away. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. But so many of the series ended up going so deep, especially on Championship Sunday. It was a real treat.
Yeah, I mean, this was probably, I wasn't around for Season 5, and I think a lot of people still claim that as the best Worlds ever. But at least from my viewing perspective, this is probably the best World Championship I've seen.
It was awesome. Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good. The Championship Sunday absolutely delivered in every sense. We didn't have a single best of 7 that was a sweep, which is actually insane to say for, such a high-level tournament. I believe it was like that in Copenhagen, but it obviously means a lot more when it's at Worlds. There's more series that were best of 7s. It was just, overall, it felt like one of those tournaments where anyone could really take it, depending on, who was playing best on the day.
Yeah, for sure. And so far, it looks like Vitality are trying to do, sorry if you hear the alert for the hurricane that we have coming. Vitality are trying to do a lot of solo plays, and they're kind of losing their grip on them, and then they're just kind of falling to SSG, and they're like, okay, I guess we'll transition this out. I feel like SSG, if you're Vitality, you really want to kind of press them in the box, but it seems like Vitality are really afraid to overcommit.
Yeah, that was one thing I remember noticing back in winter of 23 with Space Station when we had that Daniel and Arsenal roster with LJ. A lot of the game plan was to kind of feed Daniel the ball and just pray he could 1v3. I'm kind of curious because we know that we're in the offseason now. Vitality, spoiler alerts if you don't know, got eliminated before the playoffs. And so everyone's anticipating that they're going to make a roster change, but one of the things I was noticing with that Space Station roster is that, the feeding Daniel and praying it works, doesn't end up working. And that's why Hoxer was able to come in and the team was able to do much better is because they started playing as a unit again. By the way, that was an insane shot by Zen.
Goodness.
Absolute way to finish the overtime.
I remember this. He groups the ceiling and then what are you going to do about that? But I'm sorry. My unbelievable gasp for Zen cut your thought off.
No, you're good. You're good. But yeah, I'm very curious to who ends up complementing Zen on Vitality because I'm assuming that Vitality is going to build around Zen. And I think with how this season went, it kind of devolved into that, solo play and hope for the best. And especially if you have Zen on your team, occasionally he's going to be able to do it, case in point. But I'm curious who he decides to round out his roster with because he himself has shown that he's able to work very well in a team environment if he has the right players around him.
Yeah, and he's probably going to have his pick, right? It's going to be really interesting to see what they do because they're one of the few situations where we kind of know what they look like behind the scenes from like a traditional sports perspective. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and start up game 3 here.
Go for it, yeah.
But we actually know what their contract structure looks like, which we really don't get. We're typically kind of mystified as to what is going on with these teams, but we know when Vitality have been re-signing contracts. Alpha is signed to an extension. Zen signed a big extension. The only player that did not was Radosin. So he seems like the obvious one to move on from just from like a contract perspective. But at the same time, and let's get on to somebody else here. I was really unimpressed by Alpha throughout this tournament. I wonder how much impact that is going to actually have for this team. But yeah, Zen is kind of going to be able to get whomever he wants, I would assume. And, we know how strong the French community is. So I am very interested to see how things are going to break out for Vitality. And the same goes for this SSG roster. Like, do you have any thoughts on where the FK LJ duo is going to look? Or do you think Hoxer and Chicago are going to stay united as a duo? Or are they going to completely kind of fall apart at the seams here and rebuild?
Oh, absolutely. I'll first touch on the Vitality point. Yeah, that French community is very well knit, and at this point, Zen can build his Vitality roster just like Vatira has been building Carmine Core, right? He owns the keys, and while Alpha's contracted for longer, it wouldn't surprise me to see him either have that contract get bought out if another French team is looking to pick him up, or if he could unfortunately end up like Extra on BDS, where he's chilling on Vitality and none of the other, French mega teams are willing to take another chance on him and just end up riding the bench for next year, which would kind of suck to see for, almost the twilight of Alpha's career. We don't know what's going to happen with Extra, but it's always tough to work your way back from taking that kind of extended break. But to answer the questions about this roster, we know the LJ and that's a tough defense. It looked like LJ got caught out there a little bit, but I can't remember if someone else could have challenged better in the first place. But as for the LJ and First Killer duo, it's really a question of who they're going to get as their third. And I know you made a video breaking down what you thought was going to happen in this offseason, and you thought Calm would fit in there very well.
Yeah, I think that Calm would be an excellent fit. Really, with that duo, you can kind of go a lot of directions. You already have a ton of talent. You can cover yourself offensively and defensively. I feel like once you reach a certain threshold, it's all about trying to find those little micro advantages. And my immediate thought with like FK and LJ, two players, I can't believe that went in, two players who have kind of found their hard cap is not the right term, but they kind of have been locked into these certain thresholds of results over their careers, like generally speaking, where First Killer has been unable to summit winning a major, and LJ is pretty commonly like, the best player on the third best team in North America, or kind of finding top eights in majors. And oh my goodness, LJ, that was an unbelievable passing play. But when I kind of think about that, and then you think like this team is definitely going to be making lands pretty consistently, at least you would hope. I just kind of want like a dog. Like I want somebody who's not afraid to be on the land stage, somebody who's been there and done that before, and of course still has kind of the chops to hang around while also kind of understanding what his spot is going to be on the roster. I of course have doubts about both of these players have looked their best when they're kind of the number one option. You, of course, mentioned briefly that when Daniel and LJ were together, that did not work out super well because it was Daniel's team with LJ kind of playing off of him. So I'm concerned about that. But like Calm would be totally fine with coming in and being like, you two got this. I'm going to make life as easy for you two as possible. And I just feel like OG is a good spot to look for a player like that. I feel like Calm is a little more still on top of his game than a player like Nali, who I just feel like is a little more inconsistent at this point of his career.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of praise for Calm specifically on OG, and I mean there's been praise for JNaps' striking. I still think Nali's really talented mechanically, but he has had a bit of a step back this season, unfortunately. But I think another detail about Calm that I'm not sure if you know this story, but the reason he started smack talking people at LAN was due to the fact that it was Beast Mode's first LAN, and he wanted to take the pressure off Beast Mode. Mm-hmm. I think that could actually be really important as we get into the later stages of tournaments. Yeah, we're going to have to watch this go back for sure. But as we get into later stages of the tournament, LJ wasn't really present all that much for the game against Furia. And I think that if you had a player like Calm by his side trying to distract, all the attention away from LJ, maybe he's able to show up better. Because we saw how Beast Mode did at his first LAN. And I do think that Calm taking that pressure off him, putting the, onus on himself and like drawing all the attention could be a really good thing to inject into a team with LJ. So hopefully he's able to concentrate more on his gameplay and less on the pressure of the moment.
Definitely. And like, I think historically, I'm sure you could find, representations of this to kind of prove my point incorrect. But when you have these kind of heliocentric offenses where it's kind of built around one player doing really well, that's a tough spot to be in, because then if your lead talisman isn't really feeling it, you kind of put yourself into a tough spot, and the other two players are kind of used to, being supplementary as opposed to leading the charge. I feel like what BDS were able to do made a ton of sense. And the same with, G2 and Falcons as well. Like these top teams being like, literally anyone can burn you at any time. That's a lot more impactful than being like, okay, First Killer's our best player. If First Killer isn't playing well, then we're not going to play well. I feel like that's kind of a tougher spot. So Calm being able to come in and go alongside two bona fide stars and take that gravity off of both of them, I feel like is a great setup. But do you feel like, based on what you know about LJ and what you know about First Killer, just instant reactions, are you excited about this duo? Do you think that it's actually a winning combination, or do you have your doubts?
Unfortunately, I've got a bit of doubts. Just based on how LJ's performed when it comes to the last hurdle. If you look back to Event 5 this year, they were in the finals against G2, and they were up 3-2, and it didn't end up going well. They did not look the same in games 6 and 7. That reverse sweep attempt against Furia as well. He's kind of shown, even if you go back to the reverse sweep against Furia in online play in 2023, there was that moment where he's got to collect small boost pads on his way back, and Jan's able to air dribble bump him because LJ just missed every single boost pad on the way back. Yep. And that's what caused them to lose the series. So I think he unfortunately has that, hasn't passed that hurdle of being able to show up in the most important moments. And for that matter, really neither is First Killer. There's the very infamous whiff at this point at the end of the Carmine Core phase final in San Diego, I believe it was.
I believe you're correct. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a little bit worried about them being able to show up, but I think once they do in such an important moment, it'll hopefully, kind of click in that moment, right?
Yeah, I gotta say, I don't know a lot about like the inner workings of like who is, friends with who and all of that. And I think, in all esports, in sports for that matter, but in ours specifically, with it being like younger players, I think friendship is pretty critical to how these teams come together in a lot of cases. I got to be honest with you, I did not know that First Killer and LJ were going to lock in as a duo this early into the season. That really took me by surprise.
Absolutely,
Um,
yeah.
I didn't think that they would want to have it be not their team, but maybe they both kind of see the same thing that we do, and they're like, I need more firepower
Yeah,
to go here.
it's definitely the obvious answer for a super team in North America outside of what we have in G2, right? If you're trying to put the most talented players together, these are the first two that you group. That being said, will it actually, end up sticking? There's not really a history of super teams panning out too well, just in really any capacity, whether that be, I know you have a lot of knowledge about the NBA. I'm sure you could think of 1,000 examples before I could think of one. But League of Legends also has a super team problem, and for that matter, so does Rocket League.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw it with G2, huh? They really melted down over the course of that one. I feel like BDS, this kind of idea of bringing in like one young player who's like super mechie, can get it done, and then a couple veterans is very intriguing. And that's kind of something that is unfortunately not something I see working out for an LJ FK duo. Like, I feel like if you go like young and unproven, I would love to be proved wrong, but I just don't really see them going that way. I feel like they have to round out with a veteran, whether it makes the most sense in actuality or not.
Yeah, I think with the names of First Killer and LJ at this point, if they picked up someone like, for instance, a Talk, someone who hasn't had any
Yeah.
experience in the RLCS, but, has that potential upside, I think there'd be a lot of outrage and instantly all the blame would be placed on Talk if anything were to go wrong. So I think they're going to go for a more established duo. But actually, a pairing that I could see going and taking a shot on a younger, less established player to try to get back into the fold would be this Hawks and Chicago duo. I think
Yeah.
if neither of them do get picked for this LJ First Killer combo, I think that they should run it back together. We've seen them grow as a pairing throughout this season, and that's such an unfortunate goal to leak through. But we've seen them grow as a pairing throughout this season, and I think if they take a shot on a younger player, help bring that experience into the fold, I think they could easily still be competing. Maybe not for titles, but definitely for those land spots.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in that like off-season video I tried to find different pairings for them. It's almost a guarantee that Luminosity, former Luminosity, are going to be sticking. But like I feel like it would be a great opportunity to kind of bring in an LJ Light. Can you imagine if Magic Bear were to find his way into that spot? Somebody who I think could use a change of scenery, somebody who could be flanked by a couple veterans who are just trying to like improve what he has done so far in his career. I feel like that would be a great spot for him. But I also think about, some of the other players that could be out there. I know, for example, that I think Chronic and Hoxer are pretty tight. I think that Chronic is probably going to go another direction. But if you were to try and rebuild around another young mechie player, I feel like building around Chronic would be about as good as you can get. I don't know if you kind of have a favorite type of player. Maybe it's not even a young, like, first star like that, and you're thinking more of like an OG direction. But what would be like a chef's kiss third player for you?
Honestly, I haven't really looked at each player's tendencies to know who would fit in the best, right? And I think at the end of the day, LJ or yeah, LJ will probably take Sad Jr. with him if I had to guess, just based on that pairing going super well throughout history, whether it be on Space Station or on Oxygen back in the day, even.
Yeah.
But I think whoever that they end up getting, I hope, you just need to have the right mentality. And unfortunately, that's not something that we see, behind the scenes. We can only really base it off gameplay and, what each player's mechanical ability is, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But it wouldn't surprise me to see them go in that, younger direction. I know you mentioned Magic Bear. I think, that Luminosity roster is probably going to stick together, the culture they have, that they, constantly talking about the culture. It's hard to see them splitting up until we actually see a rumor about it. That is actually so much closer on 0 seconds than I remember it being. But I would be down for any of the Snowman players, really. I know NRG took that chance on Frosty and gave up on him arguably way too soon. So I would not hate to see him there. I wouldn't hate to see Scribbles join this team as well. But really just anyone who does have that, passion and motivation to try to get better with the two teammates and not, be an instant diva, which hopefully you're not going to get if you get a player with upside that hasn't been proven at the top level just yet. So, yeah, I just hope they kind of just take a risk. We keep seeing, with BDS, that would have been sick to go in. Actually.
Imagine.
We see with BDS, they just take a random chance on Drawley and win a world championship. And sure, he's an established name, but he doesn't have any RLCS experience. So they're still able to pull that off. I'd love to see someone where it's like, why would you pick up that player? Like, there's no experience there. And a lot of people were saying that about this BDS roster before the season, and look where it finished.
Yeah, I felt the same way about M80 as well. And, we've kind of seen that both of those players are very, very good at Rocket League between Drawley and Nass.
Yeah.
We saw a second ago before Chicago almost got the craziest Cuxer pinch that I've ever seen, where they kind of were like, did you notice where like the ball was kind of floating in the box, and then Hoxer and LJ were both kind of there, but then Chicago kind of took it across, and oh my goodness.
I didn't realize how much Chicago waited for that.
Let's watch this back. This might be tough for you to splice afterwards. I apologize.
No, you're good.
Chicago just kind of waiting around the midfield here. Alpha just totally kicks this.
Yeah, so it's a lot won in this corner by Hoxer, and then LJ is able to get a good 50 up, and Chicago's just kind of waiting. He's sitting on the ground with only 50 boost and sees the angle and is able to beat everyone to it. So I'm surprised he was a bit further behind the play than I expected him to be based on the amount of speed he got up there to take that shot with.
Yeah, and that's kind of that. We talked about it at the beginning, like the thing that I did not really factor in as much as I seemingly should have here is just Chicago having been here and done this. Like, I feel like a more rookie player would have kind of, been like, okay, I got to go back and get boost.
Yeah.
But Chicago kind of realized the moment, and he was like, I'm just going to, kind of hang around and see how this one goes.
Yeah. If you have time, you want to go ahead and throw on game 2 while we're at it? I know it's a little bit backwards, but
okay.
Just kind of check out the rest of the series. But yeah, Chicago having that experience, being here, done that, was definitely a factor I did not value enough heading into this World Championship. And unfortunately, that's probably the fault of OG, considering, they all had the experience, been there, done that, and it didn't work for them. I think Chicago really made a name for himself at this World Championship, both with his performance in this series and his performance against Furia. He really proved a lot of people very wrong about what he was still capable of, and I'm really happy for him, because even I was doubting, say before this World Championship, if I thought that Space Station was going to stick with a 2/3 with LJ, it'd be Hoxer staying. I was not thinking that afterwards. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I know that Chicago had tweeted something after they got eliminated along the lines of like, I feel like I've been doubted, over the course of this season. I'm excited to come back and prove everybody wrong. The unfortunate thing about that is that I think literally every single player who intends on being in the RLCS this season tweets about the same thing. So it's tough to kind of know which players are actually going to pull it out and kind of continue on. But I'm excited to hear that he plans on continuing on, because, I feel like we haven't really figured it out with the RLCS yet. It's not like traditional sports where it's like, hey, I'm like in my mid-30s, I just like have to retire soon.
Yeah.
With Rocket League, you could seemingly, Chicago could play for, another decade. Like, there's really no reason that he couldn't outside of just deciding not to. And LJ is just so gross on the ball.
Yeah,
I can't believe this.
Yeah, as much as we're praising Chicago, this game and that game 3 shot were definitely the LJ show of the tournament. He had both those clips, which were, phenomenal, truly speaking. But yeah, I mean, if you look at esports across the whole, I'm really only familiar super intimately with Rocket League, and I know a decent amount about League of Legends. If you look at a player like either Impact or Faker, both of them were on World championship winning rosters in 2013. They're still around. Faker literally won Worlds for League last year. So it's definitely possible in the scope of esports to stick around. But I think what's hurting that with Rocket League is the skill ceiling still not being reached yet. And, you know, once you're 23, you've got bills to pay. You've got a lot more things to focus on. And a player like Chicago has made it to the top. It's a lot easier to dedicate your entire life to that grind, etc. But it's definitely a lot easier for a 15-year-old getting off school, to come home, play Rocket League for several hours. And it's a lot easier for them to do that than like a 24-year-old who's got a full-time job trying to learn all the mechanics while their brain is basically already fully developed.
Yeah, and the other thing that I really think about is how important like the size of our teams are. Like, because I was trying to do the exercise of the mock off season, and very, very quickly you're like, man, like I don't really know like where this pro is going to go. Like, for example, I ended up having Arsenal on like the 8th team that I created in the exercise, and I'm still a big believer in Arsenal and his ability, but it's kind of like there's only so many teams and so many spots, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I feel like it can be tough to keep that motivation, but you know, Hoxer is kind of a shining example of why you stick with it. I mean, he kind of was, you know, fading into obscurity with Ghost Gaming, where they were basically like maybe a main event team, and then out of nowhere he gets a shot and he's kind of right back into the fold. So, you know, it's just, I guess if they're going to stick with it or not.
Yeah, one of my biggest regrets was not making a video about Hoxer and complete Hopium before that spring split, because I had this feeling that, you know, with Daniel off the team, and if we continue to play, you know, actually as a team, we could be really good. And Hoxer came in and did that. And based on his announcement video, I was like, all right, I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to pull this off with him. And I would have looked completely delusional and biased if I did make that video, but I would look like a genius in hindsight, right?
Yeah, for real. It would have paid off really well.
But yeah, Hoxer is that, you know, shining example of you can make the comeback even when you're completely written out. And that's why he's been one of my favorite players along with Nolly. Both of them were, you know, written off for a good while. Like Nolly had those really tough results on Guild where he wasn't making main events. Hoxer had only made half the main events of this season before joining Space Station. And it's like everyone thought these two players were going to be down and out. And since then, you know, Nolly won a major with Gen G. Hoxer has been on Space Station competing at a top level, maybe not, you know, winning majors, but still making playoff brackets at world championships. And it's been impressive to see.
Yeah. And to that point, could you kind of like, as a fan who watches most of, if not all of SSG's games, could you give me like the elevator pitch on Hoxer? Because you said that you might be higher on him than even Chicago, if I remember correctly. And I think that I'm definitely pretty down on him just as far as things go, but you know, it's less about like Hoxer's quality and more about just like, you know, people are always like, how do you not have this guy top 10? And it's like, well, you make a list and tell me who he's ahead of. I think that's more of the Hoxer thing where it's just, I'm pretty high on a lot of other guys, but like, what is the sales pitch for Hoxer? Like, why would a team pick him up?
Yeah, I think he's much more mechanically talented than he is ever given credit for because he does not play that way. Right, yeah. He came into that Space Station roster and, you know, started playing for the team primarily. And if he's able to show off his mechanical prowess, like he's going to be able to. He hit a pogo shot. Sure, it was on Gladiators, but he hit a pogo shot at EWC, which was really fun to watch. And even before he joined Space Station, when he was on Ghost, he had an insane corner read against Furia that really got him the reputation as the South America killer. And so I think he does have that talent, but unfortunately the drawback from the elevator pitch is the same thing we were talking about with LJ earlier and how he had a tough time showing up in some of the most important moments. And we saw that in this most recent Furia series as well. So that's kind of been how my perspective on Hoxer has shifted and why I thought that if Space Station was going to build around two of their current players and keep LJ around, it'd be Hoxer that'd be the one to go. But I think if he does iron out that, you know, showing up at the highest level, and it's obviously possible. I think the one reason why Chicago was our strongest player in that Furia series is because he had been on a bigger stage and felt the pressure a lot less. I think if he gets that ironed out, he could still definitely be a top player, but unfortunately that's something that's really holding him back at the moment.
Yeah. You've been around as a fan since 19, you said?
19, yeah.
Where does this trio rank for you as far as like all the different rosters go? Like, was this a real fan favorite for you? Is this kind of in the middle? Like, where do you feel like when you're looking back 5 years from now, like where will this team rank on your like fondness meter of all the different SSG lineups?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I've gotten in debates with people about that. That I definitely have a different perspective from some people. I think number one all time has to be typical Arsenal Rebels. They were just, the peak of Space Station Gaming when we were winning. Sure, it was online majors, but we couldn't do anything else during COVID. We were winning online majors, winning regionals. It was really the height of the organization in Rocket League, so that has to be number one. But I actually have this current squad at number 4, only behind the LJ, Hawkster, and Arsenal roster, and then the Daniel Arsenal Rebels roster. This one really was a fun roster for me, and did end up beating out that typical Arsenal AXB roster that made top 4 at Season 8 Worlds.
Yeah, I really I share your rankings. I loved that roster that they had with Arsenal. I felt like that was the best way to kind of get LJ fully engaged on the offensive end, where you have Hawkster and Arsenal who are just constantly breathing down the defense's neck and trying to get, bring some momentum-based like challenges and get demos on the opponent's end, just make it so difficult to try and transition out. And then you have LJ, who is just like nobody is paying attention to him because they're so focused on Hawkster and Arsenal and like where are they? Are they gonna like try and take the ball off of my hood right now? And then LJ can just kind of float into position, which I think suits him best. I was surprised that they moved off of that roster.
Yeah, I know during that offseason they weren't originally intending to, but I think the trust got a little bit shot when LJ and Hawkster were like, "Ooh, we might be able to get Justin," and tried to make that move happen. And then when Justin chose Shopify, it was like, all right, we'll stick with Arsenal. And Arsenal's like, yeah, no thanks, I'm out.
I'm not interested. Yeah.
Yeah, which I get it from his perspective, but I would have loved to seen that roster run it back one more time. I think one of the main reasons that roster was so fun, and I'll stand by this until we have a better one, that spring split of 2023 was probably my favorite time as a Space Station Gaming fan, even more so than the split that we were winning everything. Just mainly because of the expectations we were defying. I mean, There were so many people thinking we were going to do at best 9th through 16th in North America, and I have this quote graphic of that. Just me being completely full of myself based on 3 players, performing outside of myself. But there was, a ton of defied expectations with that roster, and getting, even if it was, people consider it fraudulent because we didn't end up winning a regional, but getting the North American 1 seed after losing such a quality star player in Daniel is just memories I'm never going to forget, to be honest.
Yeah, I totally feel you. And it's, I was glad that this SSG trio were able to kind of round things out as the season kind of got down to towards its end. Like they definitely started to reach the best version of themselves when it mattered, where, some other rosters kind of, peaked a little earlier and then faded as things went along. They did the opposite here and really found their stride as they went into Worlds. But it's tough that everybody's got to chase the G2 dragon, as it were. Like everybody's got to shift around because you just can't contend with them.
Yeah, and that's, I think, their Space Station's motivation throughout the season is one reason why no matter who Space Station Gaming, the organization, ends up getting, because I'm going to stick with the org. I've been doing that for a while. But no matter which duo this organization ends up getting, whether it is the Hawks or Chicago that they run it back with, or they manage to get the bid for first killer and LJ, I'm fairly confident in the team's ability to make land no matter what and just still be an entertaining roster to follow. Because this team could have easily settled for being like, we were the 3rd best. We just got screwed by Gen G in the quarterfinals 3 times. But they actually went out and proved during that break that they had during the Copenhagen Major and really came back into the second split looking like a much more definitive 3rd best that was closer to 1 and 2 than they were to 4.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's going to be a shame to see this breakup. I am interested to see, we've heard reporting from Achilles where like a lot of organizations might be taking a haircut here this offseason as far as like how much money they're willing to spend on their rosters. I hope that if it's not FK and LJ, that they at least keep the duo. I really just don't see how you're going to rebuild around one of the other two. Maybe it's
Yeah.
not rebuilding around one of the two, but rather it's, bringing in talent around them. But,
Yep.
there's going to be a lot of dangerous teams. We now have reporting that Complexity are going to be coming over.
Yeah.
Dignitas are rebuilding around Stizzy, which might be bringing some other players in as well. And then, as we have seen every single season, there's going to be at least one or two players that we've literally never heard of who are going to end up being
Exactly.
pretty good. So time will tell.
Yep. But I mean, I think we've made our way through just about every game of this series that we could
We
have.
watched them all.
We anticipated only watching 1, 3, and 5, and then we just kept
I know.
talking. But
And it was like, Belleair will kind of give color on what's happening on the pitch. I just yapped the entire time. We just did like a podcast. We didn't even really. That's on me.
exactly. No, you're good. We gotta maybe revive said podcast because since Shiftcast left, the real big ball knowers are kind of out of the scene now.
There's a big
Unfortunately,
gap,
There
There's
is.
just chalk floating around, first touch as well.
Yeah.
Maybe Wave Dash, or I'll revive the old solo podcast. We'll see.
Yeah.
Now that Worlds is over, we got a long off season of waiting, and again, thank you so much for reaching out and wanting to do this,
Of course.
and
Yeah.
have me on the channel. And I hope that I get to come back on and do it again sometime.
Absolutely. It was great having you. Hopefully, people have stuck around this long to listen to us ramble. But yeah, absolute blast to have you. Would love to continue watching Rocket League together, talking about it. Plenty of opportunity to review some of the old files as this offseason continues.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, you got any closing remarks, closing statements, anything else? Shout outs?
No, shout out to everybody who's listening. Stay hydrated. If you want, check out my YouTube. If you don't, that's okay. I hope that you keep supporting Martian here. And that's all from me.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. Check out Belleair. He does a lot more of this style content where he's, talking about, how the scene's going to break down as well as looking at the gameplay and individual players. So that's definitely more of his speed. So if you like this, absolutely go check him out. That being said, I'll probably wrap up here. I don't normally do one of the outros where I'm like and subscribe. I haven't gotten to that level just yet. But yeah, show Belleair some love, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.